Hello, everyone. Welcome to New Detroit's Town Hall series, Content and Conversations on Race. I'm Marcelle Favors with New Detroit. Our organization is a nonprofit that seeks to eliminate racism and create a more just society in metropolitan Detroit. We are super excited to be hosting this special edition of our Town Hall in conjunction with the W.K. Kellogg's fifth annual National Day of Racial Healing. We are super excited to have both of our guests and our moderator join us, Rochelle Riley, who is the author of the book, The Burden, African Americans and the Enduring Impact of Slavery, as well as Dr. Rose Moten, who is our moderator, who is a clinical psychologist and owner of the Bloom Transformation Center in Detroit. Please welcome both of our guests.
So welcome everyone to the W.K. Kellogg 5th Annual National Day of Racial Healing. My name is Dr. Rose Moten, clinical psychologist and director of Bloom Transformation Center here in Detroit. And I am joined with the illustrious, her reputation precedes itself, formerly nationally syndicated columnist for the Detroit Free and current director of arts and culture for the city of Detroit, Rochelle Riley. It's my pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
So the 5th Annual Day of National Racial Healing. I've had an opportunity to be part of W.K. Kellogg's Foundation, this event in past years. And so I was really excited to hear that you were going to be our guest today because, of course, you know, I have a copy of your book here, The Burden. And if you don't have your copy, guys, get out there and get your copy. It's available. Great little anthology here of what we're going to be discussing today. So I'm so excited. And this is always, I want to say fortunately, but then unfortunately, a relevant time to discuss this because in our wildest dreams, we would love to say in 2021 that racial healing is not an issue here still in the United States of America. But if we just consider the events of last week, we know that's not the case. So Rochelle, I want you to kind of just share, if you don't mind, a little bit about this anthology of stories here that speaks to why slavery, you know, and racism is still affecting our lives here in this country.
Thank you, Rose. And I want to thank the Kellogg Foundation and also thank New Detroit. I too have participated in past days of racial healing. They're one of the most important things that have happened, and I'm so thrilled that we're doing this. I can tell you that the reason I did the book was because a newspaper columnist back in, oh my gosh, it was probably 2017, wrote a column in Pittsburgh that said, Black people need to get over slavery. It was a long time ago. It doesn't affect you now. You're better off than had you stayed in Africa. And it let me know three things. He didn't know any Black people. He had never been to Africa, and he needed to not write any more columns. But as a fellow columnist, you know, freedom of speech, I did not write a column, you know, to rebut that or to tell him just how horribly wrong he was. But I did write a Facebook post because I was just so livid. And the response to that Facebook post was so great that I decided to do the book. And I was just going to write a book. But then I realized, you know, that'll just be me writing a column. What I need is for people to hear from a lot of people. So I started calling up friends and a few people I didn't know to tell them what I was doing. And when I tell you, all of them were doing things because these are very powerful voices, people who were doing their own books. My first call was to Leonard Pitts, the Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the Miami Herald. He was finishing his novel. He put it down and said, I'll write something. I called my friend Nicole Hannah-Jones, and I said that she was working on her book, and this was before 1619, and she put down her book so she could write the foreword for me. It just went over and over, and I can tell you what was most shocking, but let me know I did the right thing. Out of all of these 23 essays, I didn't tell anybody what to write. I didn't tell them to choose topics, education, justice. Every single person wrote about something different, all the different ways that slavery and the enslavement that built this country continues to impact us. And I tell people all the time, slavery did not end. It just changed addresses and moved from the plantations to the courtrooms and boardrooms and classrooms and newsrooms of America. So that is the burden that African Americans have been carrying for America. And it's time for America to help carry that burden and then lay it down.
Wow, awesome. Yeah. I want to, again, we are, what is today? January 13th, 2021. So we know just a week ago we experienced.
Like 2020 is holding off your life and coming into 2021, and I want to.
I heard someone say last week that December 38th was really showing out, because it was as if 2020 did not end. And I thought that was just so on point there. When you talk about just how all these people had different stories. So we know the theme was, again, the burden that we carry now, but all these different stories that even people, you talk about Leonard Pitts Jr., these are individuals who are esteemed in their field. They are recognized as these upstanding United States citizens. However, that does not dismiss them from what is experienced by many Black Americans. So when you read this column from this individual noting that we need to just get over that, Black America needs to get over slavery and what have you, there seems to be this common theme that if a person doesn't experience something in their lives, that it doesn't exist. And when you look at that, even when we're looking at the current pandemic we're in, we still have people. We've lost now 350,000 people in this country. We've lost them to this pandemic, yet we still have individuals that want to believe this doesn't exist. And it's almost as if they don't experience it, it's just null and void. But we've been experiencing that as Black America for centuries. Speak on that a little bit.
Let's break that down a little, because when you talked about people not believing something if they don't experience, we're talking about white people. They don't experience these things that we've been trying to tell them about for 400 years. Literally, while enslavement was happening, there were people who weren't living in the South who thought those were like, wives' tales, and nobody's really doing that kind of stuff. And when we've talked about, police officers, bad police officers, not all police officers, killing people, folks are like, that doesn't happen, until that officer kneeled on George Floyd's neck until he was dead. So what happened last week for a lot of us, and I wrote about this for the Undefeated, they called and said, would you please weigh in? And I never realized how much I missed my column until this past month with all this going on in America. But there are those of us who are Black who watch that in fear, because you've got people who literally led an insurrection on the American government on behalf of a white supremacist. And if they can get away with that, there's no telling what might happen to us. So there is a whole different feel about this experience thing. And what we needed to do, and what we tried to do for decades, is to get people who haven't experienced to feel what we're experiencing, not just to know it or to try and dismiss it or to say, let's move on. There's nothing more heinous and insulting and hurtful than for somebody to say, oh yeah, let's just move on from that. That happened, but let's go back to this pretend mythical racial harmony that we have. We're in this post-racial society, which is the dumbest phrase I've ever heard. That's not where we are. That's not truth. And we have to live in truth and live in the known world together from now on.
So when you speak about white America needing to understand, where we're coming from, we're talking about empathy here, correct? And this is, go ahead.
They can't empathize because they will never feel well, I take that back. Some of them felt some of what we feel, because I don't know if you saw the video that was all over social media where they were arresting this guy. It wasn't last week, it was sometime last year at a protest. And this officer knelt him down on the ground, put his hands behind his back to handcuff him. And he said, stop it, you're treating me like a Black person.
Wow, okay.
There's empathy,
so there's awareness. There's an awareness there, that person here.
Empathy, awareness, and wanting to do something. When Dr. King wrote in a letter from a Birmingham jail that his greatest disappointment was the progressive whites who claimed to embrace the movement but stood by, that's the hurtful part. It's not enough to say, oh, I'm not a racist, or oh, let's go out here and march with people. No, you have to understand that this is a daily life for us, and how can you step up to help change it?
When I was working on my doctoral program, one of the things that my supervisor during my practicum told me is what would separate me from being a good psychologist from a great psychologist is the ability to empathize. And by definition, that's the ability to place yourself, your feet in someone else's shoes and view the world from their perspective. And I want to share with you last week when I was watching, my daughter and I were watching the confirmation of the votes, and we watched it all unfold like in real time. And what was really insulting and hurtful for me when I really sat down to consider what we had just witnessed that day was the fact that the white America, those individuals who claim, you know, to empathize, their biggest gripe was how we look to the rest of the world. You know, how bad this looked to the rest of the world. Sort of like our slip is showing, you know, for those that remember the old Baptist churches and things of that sort. However, for Black America, and I shared this because I do a lot of work on racial healing here in my office, because that's huge as far as the psychological burden that a lot of African Americans carry in this country. But what I shared is that, you know, if your biggest gripe with what happened last week was how bad we look to other countries, then you should understand that is a form of privilege in and of itself. For us, for Black America, we were further reminded in watching this occur, watching police stand by and letting these people just take over. Protesters at first, you know, then you know, the language got a little bit more stronger as the day went along. But these were protesters protesting at first that you.
Disagree with you. They were never protesters. They just didn't get rowdy until they got to the pre-approved, planned place where they were supposed to be rowdy.
Yes.
They marched to the Capitol the way that Donald Trump told them to. And he said, they've stolen the election, so we must fight. We must fight. So they didn't have to head it down. It's like when you're marching off to war. Everybody's marching in lockstep to get there, and then the battle begins. This wasn't a protest. This was an attempted. And I think that the bad thing is, if you actually really did disagree, there was a way to come and do that. If they had come and gathered in those large numbers so people could see and be reminded of how many people believe in Donald Trump, so much as 74 million people voted for him, they would not be headed to prison. They would not have Donald Trump facing an impeachment. And I think that they still don't get that. The white privilege is so strong, they're still trying to figure out why people are mad at them. They're still trying to figure out how they can separate themselves from the few rowdy folks who broke windows and attacked a police officer with a flag. And that is what gets me, this idea that you can literally say, I'm sorry. That's just like, you know, somebody, I was thinking about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is saying, oh, okay, we do need to impeach Trump, and we need, this will be a great way to get him out of our party. Mitch McConnell can kiss my history. Because here's the thing, he has enabled all of this up to this point. This is like somebody watching a guy going down the street, setting fires to everybody's house and not saying anything until he gets to his house. And it's like, okay, we're gonna have to stop him. I don't appreciate the fact that we are literally ignoring that there were congressional representatives who were involved in this, that this was planned online and in person and on, I mean, this whole thing was, no, my dog knew that this was coming, but the FBI saying they didn't have any idea, baloney. So I'm very concerned for this idea that we have to move on without actually doing something. You don't have a crime and you go, well, okay, he killed somebody, but he didn't mean it. Let's just go on to the bar and have a drink. No.
Well, Rochelle, I likened it last week to gaslighting, the psychological concept of gaslighting, because again, while you have America looking at this, you know, people not of color looking at this as, oh my God, how bad this looks to everyone else, we were further reminded in that time, how many hours that took, we were further reminded of just how little value Black lives really do have in this country. When you look at the disparity, or the contrast, I should say, between the steps of the Capitol when there was a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest on public grounds in the summer, and the lack of police presence, actually, as you state, involvement in this incident that happened last week, it further reminded us. And I shared how our DNA, Black American DNA last week, every strand, every fiber of our DNA last week was further painfully reminded of our little value that we have here in this country. And people didn't understand it because, again, as you said, you know, it's for them, it's let's move on. This gaslighting concept. Let's get over it. It's over it. None of the, you know, politicians were hurt. You know, we're going to just sweep it under the rug that we actually had elected officials involved in this, and police officers involved in this, law enforcement involved in this. This is a form of gaslighting. But for Black America, part of our burden for 400 years has been this whole concept of get over it. As you mentioned, the columnist suggested.
And his name was Jack Kelly, by the way. It's in the book. I just,
Thank you.
but he's
Thank you.
no longer a columnist. They didn't fire him. He just retired, but I'm sure that he retired shortly after realizing maybe it was time to go. But you know, this is the other thing too. And this is what really bothers me. When your white privilege is so strong that you're doing something really wrong and people are reluctant to stop you because you're white. That mess last week went on for 6 hours. It wasn't, oh my God, they're storming, let's call out the National Guard. This was the National Guard not being allowed to come. This was Capitol Police taking selfies and opening the gate so they could come in, saying, well, we really couldn't stop them, so we went ahead and let them. What? You got people armed with, there's a guy with a spear, nobody in mass, and you're gonna let them come into our hallowed hall of government just because you didn't think you could handle it? And the things that they did, every time I see that picture of that horrible thug with his feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk, or I think about, okay, what Russian hackers, you know, I read too many spy novels, what Russian went in with them so they could steal computers and put USB drives into computers. Nancy Pelosi mentioned on 60 Minutes that a laptop was stolen. Nobody is talking about that. There's no telling what somebody has access to who knows what they're doing because of that. I literally said the next day, and I didn't write about it, I just tweeted it. Do they know that everybody left? There was this great movie that Denzel Washington starred in called Inside Man, and if you haven't seen it, cover your ears for a minute. Literally, bank robbers, and what they did was the bank robbers went in as janitors and built a wall and put a guy in the wall. So when it was time to rob the bank, he came out and robbed the bank, and they couldn't figure out, well, we don't have anybody who came in the bank. How did they rob it? And he went back into that wall, sealed himself back in, and then came out as a customer after he'd robbed the bank. I said, now that's an ingenious plot, but how many people really paid attention to who went into the Capitol and stole documents? Thank God for those junior pages who grabbed those votes, those electoral votes, you know, what they were there to count. Everybody got rushed out and left the boxes, and they grabbed those boxes and marched out with them. Or those terrorists would have gotten what they wanted, that they couldn't count them. So, you know, this very simple process of government would not have been able to go on. So I'm still livid, less so each day as I try to figure out how to turn that anger into something that can be done. Like,
I'm so glad you said that, because we have to transform that anger. On
Yes.
That day, I remember I was on the phone with my sister, my daughter, who is like a social justice pioneer, you know, at the age of 17, she's blazing her own trail. She was there watching it too. And we both had to just deliberately, just very consciously calm ourselves down, because we could just feel just our physiological state just going there. Because again, we watched, as you said, not only these people go in to the Capitol, but be just invited to walk out freely. Like, we waited until they felt it was time for them to leave and, okay, go home or fly back home or wherever. And it was just in disbelief when we have watched, just even in the last year, just all the different incidents with George Floyd, and, you know, just the different incidents where individuals who committed crimes that are just minuscule compared to what we witnessed last week lost their lives as a result. You have masses that are just leaving with property, you know, with podiums. And it's interesting, again, to talk about the privilege part. The young man, if you remember the man who had the Viking hat on with the horn,
Yeah.
he had his face.
Oh my God. Oh, I know where you're going with this.
Oh, you saw what, you know, his mother has pleaded with the courts. Share the story.
It all over again. You cannot get people to even serve people vegetables. They have literally put people in prison who couldn't get halal food. There are people who couldn't get kosher food, and he refused to eat because they couldn't serve him some shaman vegetarian diet.
Organic.
And I just forced them. I got livid all over. You know, see, your job is to keep us calm and make us. I had calmed down. I switched from the coverage to watching HGTV and just seeing the recaps. When I read that, I was right back to DEFCON 1 and had to start. I said, I need to call Rose. I'm going to need some help to come back. It's almost every single day there's another slap. Yeah. He's getting special food.
He's getting special food.
Are they going to give him special food in prison?
Yeah, because he only does.
A police officer with a flag. Another police officer died, and Donald Trump refused to lower the flags to half staff. They did it after he went down to, well, maybe they didn't wait till he went to Texas to sign a wall, autograph a wall, but it still took a couple of days. And he should have been at his funeral.
Years ago, Rochelle, there was about 10 years ago, there was a study done on Epigene Genetics. And they did a study on the offspring. These weren't even individuals that were involved in the Holocaust, but their offsprings. I'm talking about children, grandchildren, and so forth. And what they found is that there were actual genetic changes to their DNA from the trauma that they experienced during that period of the Holocaust. And we know, not to minimize the horrors of the Holocaust, but we know that period is a small fraction of the 400 years of slavery that was experienced by enslaved people in this country. And when in this study, when it came out, people were just amazed, like, oh my gosh, that trauma, the trauma they experienced didn't just affect that person, but it affected their offsprings who didn't even personally experience the Holocaust. I oftentimes refer to that when I'm treating patients here in the office, because when you talk about just the higher incident of stress-related disorders that Black America has, from hypertension, you know, by definition, chronic illness is something that takes time to develop. I was recently on a call with a medical doctor who was just talking about the vaccine that's coming out. And one of the things that he pointed out and he reminded me of is how for Black America, you know, we are just genetically predispositioned to carry a lot more of this disease that we're having because of the racial dis-ease that our ancestors experienced, and, you know, the changes that it caused to our genetic makeup. Because again, if you can look at this segment of individuals that had this effect in 12 years of atrocities, what did 400 years of atrocities do? So as you're talking about, you needed to calm down, you felt yourself go back up there. That literally was happening to Black America. Like, it wasn't just, oh, we're angry and we're upset and get over it. Literally, our physiology was being impacted and affected by what we were witnessing on that television screen there. And it continues to be day in and day out. We are seeing the effects of that. Again, when we talk about your book is so appropriately titled, when we talk about the burden, you think about how disproportionate Black America has been impacted by COVID. And people want to say, yeah, we know, you know, we have less food choices in Black communities. We know the diet is not necessarily as healthy, but let's not negate the fact that physiologically and genetically, due to those 400 years of enslavement, the Jim Crow that followed, and what we are still experiencing today impacts our immune system day in and day out.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the study, because I'm one of those folks who really works hard to try and get people not to compare pain. What was worse, the Holocaust or the enslavement? Don't do that. But when you get a study like that, like literally a groundbreaking study like that, the first thing I want is for somebody to say, okay, we need to do that for African Americans. So that we can show this, that's like a pilot. That's like, you know, okay, here's a blueprint to do that. This is what's wrong with America because we're a white supremacist country. Nobody's going to do that. No people can afford to do that, and no white person wants to know the answer. I'm sorry, not no white person. Most of the white people who could do it don't want to know the answer. That's something that the government should have done before the Tuskegee experiment, before Tulsa, before Rosewood, before Emmett Till. I think that we literally have not looked at the cumulative damage of all of those different things, the hundreds and hundreds of things, a whole period of lynching. I hear the word lynching now and that does something to my skin. That's not something to take lightly. So when somebody, whether they're white or Black, because Clarence Thomas, I'll never get over it with him about his high-tech lynching. When you use a word like that that describes this horrible thing that really happened, you diminish what really happened. And we never asked anybody, what did all of that do to your family? I mean, you're talking about people who it was illegal to teach them to read. We overcame that without help. Somebody had to explain to Betsy DeVos why there were historically Black colleges because we couldn't go to white colleges, but they would not be funded properly. So we've still been treated like second-class citizens forever, but we still excel. We still do the things we're supposed to do. And we're now in the 21st century where we're still dealing with to prove that we are full citizens of America. So when W.E.B. Du Bois color line would be the problem of the 20th century. He had no idea that it would be the problem of the 21st century. And if we don't do something about it, it's going to be the problem of the 22nd century if we survive that long with nobody paying attention to climate change like it's real.
What do you feel the solution, and I know that's a heavy question to ask and it can't be wrapped up in the time we have today, but what comes to mind just off the top of your head when you talk about what needs to be done? What's the first step you believe to free us from the burden that continues in our world today?
The thing that Lyndon Johnson and Franklin Roosevelt got was that you have to do something major to change something. If you're coming out of a Great Depression, or if you know you have dealt with a civil rights movement that proved that all people were being mistreated, that's how you have major workers programs, major education programs. You don't do little things state by state and hope people work it out the way Donald Trump did with PPEs. Well, it's not the federal government's job. You all handle that. There needs to be a major literally, and don't use the word reparations because nobody's going to talk to you, but talk about this repairing of this damage. So I'm talking a major program that provides education and job training for every Black person in America who wants. I'm talking about opening up the prisons, and every person who has been somebody, let them out now. And that there's a minuscule number of people who should have been in a prison system. Our penal system was just another form of slavery, which is what Leonard Pitts wrote about. We went from the Emancipation Proclamation and sending people away from the plantation. All right, y'all are free, go on now. No, you're not gonna get 40 acres and a mule, how you eat. We don't care how you take care of your children. We're not giving you clothes. Go forth and conquer. To a Reconstruction period that almost worked, where Hiram Revels could be elected to the Senate. And you had Black people who were becoming equal, and folks were like, oh, wait a minute, no, they can't be equal because then we don't have a superior class. We can't be first class. We can't get all the money if they're doing this. And Reconstruction ended. So now you've got a second century of mistreating Black folks. So then all of a sudden there's Jim Crow laws to make sure that it's clear that we're second class citizens. You can't drink from the same water fountain. You can't sit at a lunch counter. You have to sit at the back of a bus. And people allowed this because they needed to be superior. It has always been a white supremacist country, but we weren't allowed to talk about it. People downplayed it. You had some Black folks saying, oh no, those things are in the past. And some of these poor kids, and we have to stop calling millennials. And when we're talking about them older, they're going to be baby boomers, and we're still going to be calling them millennials because that's when we started talking to them. We need to talk to some of these really young people who are so far removed from some of these instances and not being taught it in school that they don't know what's going on. They think life is great until the first time somebody arrests them because they looked at something wrong in a store, or a cop pulls them over and they're like, well, how could you be doing that? You're a police officer. We got to keep them woke.
Got to keep, and it boils down again with my background in psychology. I talk an awful lot about the conditioning. This is deeply rooted conditioning. And you gave some great examples of what needs to be done for Black America, you know, for us to just help attempt to equalize the playing field. But I point to white America oftentimes. And
I'm glad you said that, because it's not all what you can do for Black people. It's what you can do for yourself by recognizing that there are Black people who are smarter than you, who
yes.
your company, who should be running your companies, who should be sitting on your boards, who should be. I wrote a column years ago because the city of Louisville, there was this publisher of the newspaper that I was working for, I didn't get fired for it, who kept talking about how Louisville had a peaceful transition for desegregating schools, which was an absolute lie. What he was talking about was how they put a Black kid in several schools so they were no longer all white. So that was supposed to be a peaceful transition. And what they did by testing the teachers was found that the Black teachers who were teaching in Louisville scored better on the test and were better teachers than many of the white teachers, and they didn't want people to know it. You have to stop with this, and you're right, it's about conditioning. We have been trained that Black people are less capable, that Black people are not as smart, that Black people can't do certain things, and Black people have believed it too.
Yes.
That's what white people need to do. You need to decide today. I don't want you to speak out. I don't want you to make a speech. I don't want you to write a column for the Times. I want you to decide where in your life you know you can change something that you did that was discriminatory because it was the way things were done.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. So we're going to open up for questions now. If you don't mind typing your question, I want to get back to that whole, like you said, I'm so glad you said it's not just conditioning on whites, but Blacks too, because many Blacks have have bought into this conditioning, because by definition, you can condition a person even to be against themselves.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, when you talk about the conditioning with law enforcement, for instance, when you think about just how we've been represented culturally throughout history, where we were painted out of pictures. I don't know if you've checked out the Netflix show Bridgerton, which
Yeah.
is really just, you know, taken off. It's amazing. It's amazing. But
And that's because of Shonda Rhimes. You
yes,
let somebody who's brilliant, who knows what they're doing, who can show you a different way of seeing things, like she did with Grey's Anatomy. All of a sudden, you have a whole new way to look at things.
and when I looked at that, because she is painting the picture as it was, you know, we were painted out of the history in the 1800s as being royalty in some of the places no one have ever thought we were royalty in. And so when I was looking at Shonda Rhimes' latest creation, who was minimized, by the way, let's say at ABC, she was $1 billion plus,
They're
$2
big
billion.
marbles and went somewhere else, and ABC will never get over it. So
Never get over it. You know, but the fact that she has this agenda, even if she's not saying it verbally, I see what's going on, that she's it's a cultural, just putting us back into the cultural places that we belong. Even in religious figures, we were painted over. So it's amazing, and it's so necessary for us to consider the reconditioning, the deprogramming that has to happen for both Black and white America, and the reconditioning. And that can happen because
it will happen, but that's the only way things will change. And I'm glad you mentioned
the only way. Yeah.
I do want to say there is a fourth thing that I should have mentioned. This cannot be about politics. This cannot be about party. I am neither a Democrat nor a Republican. As an independent, I can tell you I don't feel I have a home in either party. So I don't want us to talk about politics at all, because as long as reparations or repairing or moving forward or having progress or even having a discussion becomes about the politics, so you have to be on one side or the other, we will never make any progress. So forget the politics. The COVID-19 pandemic is not a political discussion. Race in America is not a political discussion. These are emotional human rights discussions.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to pause for 1 second because we do have some questions. I think they're putting some on the screen, and they're going to put the attendees, the audience on the screen. So we can see our audience, Rochelle.
To the gallery. Oh, wow. Hi, Michelle. Hi, John.
Good morning.
Good morning. So do any of you guys have any questions?
Well, I'll start. It's maybe more of a comment. Rochelle, I really appreciate what you said in just the last 5 minutes. As you said, you know, it's not that you're looking, or that we should be looking for people to go out and make a speech, write something really profound, but the point that you made around self-reflection and awareness that, you know, maybe education needs to take place, and then tying back to the whole concept of the burden that others are bearing, just seeking to understand where everybody's coming from, much in the same way that if somebody was having somebody on your team was having a family issue at home that's separate from work, you want to tune into that and try to understand, try to help. And so I think if you look at it from that lens and kind of ground yourself that you got to be educated, then my next thought is then you have to start to play to whatever strength or whatever thing you might bring to the table where you can make a difference, which might be, in some people's case, you know, the profound writing, or, you know, public post, or something of that nature. But it could also be, you know, depending on the role that you're in, if there's an opportunity to make, you know, if you're a leader and there's an opportunity to make sure that dialogue can happen, if there's an opportunity to make sure that you're bringing all the right people to the table, doesn't mean that you have to take the lead in that discussion. But you have to enable the moment to happen and for people to be able to share and learn, and then hopefully just walk away inspired a little bit more to, and do something back to your first point, which is as an individual, right? Go back and reflect and, okay, I took something away from that conversation, and then you come back the next time and maybe you're giving more, right? Mm-hmm. Or again, playing to your strengths in a way you can make an influence. So I appreciate you saying that, because sometimes it can be maybe a little bit overwhelming for all of us, no matter what the topic is. If the expectation is, if I can't get out there and write something profound, or if I can't get up and take a, you know, front and center spot on the stage and say something unique, then I don't have anything to offer. And that's not the case, right?
Thank you so much, John. That was so well said. And I do want to say, as a writer, I'm not suggesting you don't write something profound.
Right.
And if you have the opportunity to do that, and there's an op-ed
That's
page,
right.
I'm just saying that's not enough to throw something out there and say, okay, I've done my part. Make sure that people know that you did that, or have a Zoom call with just some folks in your neighborhood and say, okay, let's talk about this just to see where we are. I think some people will be surprised.
Yeah, yeah. So you can start, even start, that's a great suggestion, Rochelle, because again, it doesn't have to be this grand scale, effort you can make. You can start right at home. You can start right at home, and that effect can definitely just trickle out to your community. Thank you.
Yeah, I thank you for that, because I feel like I hold myself back because I can't make a grand gesture, or I'm afraid of speaking too loudly, or is it my place to speak? But if I can live these little things and, be a good ally and a good friend, and kind of like say something when I see something, that at least for me is a start, that I acknowledge that, and move from there, I guess.
Bravo for you, Michelle. And let me tell you, sometimes the grandest gestures are little gestures, like reaching out to a colleague who may think folks aren't paying attention to, or they just may be a little beleaguered, or, going someplace that you haven't gone to. I gave a speech to a large group of people who were saying, we want to connect more with Black people. I said, okay, Sunday, go to a Black church. That's one of the most segregated times in America. Mm-hmm. Just pick one and show up. Nobody's going to bite. But that does bring me to a point that I want to make sure that because everything does not fall onto white people and white America. It falls onto us to have the connection to work together. So I have to say that for Black people, you have to remember everybody is not alike. Just like you don't want somebody to paint all Black people with that big broad brush. Don't do that with white people. The folks who are my friends, who are white, they're not my white friends, they're my friends.
Right.
Feel my pain. The conversations we have are very honest and open and real. I would not let anybody put them in a category of somebody who is white supremacist and doesn't care. They fight so much all the time for something different. And they do it in their daily lives, making sure that their kids have Black friends, making sure that they ask me about things that are going, like last week, oh my God, I can't believe that. Talk to me about that, and letting me tell them how that made me feel as a Black person. So everybody has a responsibility, but the biggest responsibility belongs to the American government, because they never did anything.
Yeah, I agree.
I want to go back, Michelle, if you don't mind. I hear, as you're talking, I can hear the emotion
in
your voice. Can you just speak to that a bit?
Sure. I think with everything that's going on, you don't know how or where to take a stand, or like I just got done arguing with my family on Facebook. Probably 50 or 60 comments about what went on last Wednesday, and ready to unfriend my uncles and cousins and call them out as closet racists, and I did, and it was scary and hard. So
yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you even sharing that, because what you're experiencing is what a lot of white America is experiencing at this moment. And it's important for us to recognize that we don't, Black America, we're not minimizing that. We know this is not difficult for you all to take this stance when we talk about going against your family unit and possibly, as you said, unfriending and dissociating yourself from these individuals. We recognize that it's not easy, however, it's necessary if change is going to happen. Yeah, so I appreciate you even sharing that and being brave and courageous enough to share that with
I wish
us.
I could.
I
was just going to say, I wish I could give hugs. Rochelle, like you were saying, white friends and Black friends. How can I reach out to my friends and make sure they're okay without putting it in the white friends and Black friends category?
You would do it the same way you would do with anyone. Hey, I'm just checking on you to see how you're feeling. You need to talk. Can I have a cup of coffee delivered so that we can, chat on? Let me tell you, the worst thing we were trying to make some progress is COVID. We can't even be in rooms together where if we were together for the first time ever, we might actually, deal with each other differently. I could hug you now because I know how hard this is, and I can't imagine. I have so many friends who have told that story, and I'm emotional because they did it, and they wanted me to know that they did it. Like I said, that's a huge gesture. That may have been like a little conversation on Facebook with your family for you, but that is a huge thing. Imagine that happening a million times.
Yes.
Yeah, and it has to happen, I think. You have to have that hard conversation.
But you can call me. I'll make sure that I send over my number so we can chat. We can get on Zoom with a cup of coffee or something stronger.
I have coffee.
Mine is gone, but I'll get some more.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And that's it. And yeah, to Rochelle's point, it's so necessary. Just reach out to a friend. During last summer's, massive global, there's a shift occurring. I want to just say this. Last year, we saw something we've never seen before. We saw global. We saw global. And as horrific as COVID has been, one of the silver linings is that all the distractions that have been so just helpful in keeping us from really recognizing how this is still such a huge problem. All those distractions of sports and travel and vacationing, all that was stripped away. So the world was forced in a way to recognize the reality of what's still going on here in America. And as a result, we gain allies, not just here in this country for the first time, we gain allies globally. And I want you, Michelle and John, to understand that we recognize that Black America did. And that gave us a sense of hope we have not had, my parents didn't have, my grandparents didn't have, through social media, we saw people at other ends of the earth, New Zealand, Australia, just other sides of the world, just really advocating for us. And it makes a huge difference. So as Rochelle said, reach out to a friend. I had several white friends of mine who would just, call or text me and just say, how are you doing? And to share what you share. They're being honest and saying, I had an argument with my parents or my sisters or brothers, and they are closeted racists, and I didn't realize that. But it's okay to start even at that small scale, because again, if we have 1 million, like Rochelle said, if we have 1 million and we can multiply that to 2 million, 3 million, 10 million, and continue that trend, we can actually for the first time really start seeing some change.
Well, Rose, I don't want to wrap up without us literally talking about that point you just made, which is so important. For the first time ever, people saw not the Coca-Cola version of America, one that is, just do it, and Nike and sports and actors and actresses and fun culture and music. They saw that raw underbelly that has been something we have lived with, but other people didn't have to for a long time. And while that was a global movement, there were dozens and dozens of those protests around this country where people said, oh my God, I just had no idea. Every time something good happened in the wake of George Floyd's death, whether some brilliant who had not been promoted was made the head of a television company, or some CEO announced that the deputy CEO was going to be this person who should have been at all over the place. People were promoting people of color, people were doing things. Every single time I saw one of those, I said, thank you, George Floyd. Because like Crispus Attucks was an African-American who was the first person to be killed in the American Revolution, George Floyd's death is what has led to this. And it took that, I hate that it was that ultimate sacrifice for him, but it took that for people to go, oh, we really do have a problem. They've been telling us we had a problem and we didn't listen, but we do have a problem. And when I hear people say we have a problem, that's the first step. It's not your problem. It's not a Black person's problem. It's our problem.
Our problem. Absolutely. I actually, last August, dropped my daughter off. She started college in Portland, Oregon. And when I look, the protests are still going on there. Let me just tell you guys. And when you look at the faces of those protesters, the vast majority are not people that look like me. And it gives me chills. It gave me chills to actually see that, because again, people are starting to get it, and they're starting to step into these shoes and experience empathy at a level that they've never experienced before. And for that, we're grateful. We still have a lot of work to do, but we are so grateful for individuals like you, John, individuals like you, Michelle, who are willing and again, courageous enough to just say, let's have this conversation. So Rochelle, we have a few minutes left. You know, any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Well, I want to thank Michelle and John too. Thank you for saying something. And Michelle, thank you so much, literally, for taking that courageous step. I want to say this is so important, and I'm so glad that Kellogg has done this. I'm so glad that New Detroit is still on the job after all these years. For the first time in American history, from its founding in 1619 and its big, being built on the backs of enslaved labor to 1776 when we ratified the country to now, this is the most important moment because for the first time since 1776 or the 1700s, we the people can finally mean we the people. And as long as we see it as we the people, and it includes all the people and everybody works towards that, we may actually get to a point where we do not have this same problem with racial healing for the next 100 years. It will only work if every sentence begins with we.
Amen. Amen to that. And before we go, Rochelle, I want you to just share with us your latest book. Share with us.
I am so excited. I can't believe how I have a full-time job, but I'm also doing promotion for 2 books. But when The Burden came out, it did very well. So the paperback edition was just announced, and you can get The Burden anywhere books are sold. But my next book comes out in February. February 2nd is when it hits bookstores and Amazon. You can pre-order it everywhere now. You can pre-order it from Wayne State University Press, my publisher, but you can also pre-order it from Amazon. And I think you might even be able to pre-order it at some of the bookstores, but it's called That They Lived, African Americans Who Changed the World. These are not hidden figures. These are not people that they're popping up like Katherine Johnson, who helped send a man to the moon and we didn't know till she was almost 100 years old. These are people that everybody sort of knows, but they know them as posters, as people that they see Black History Month and then that's it. But these are people that every American child should know. So what I did was reacted to something I saw on social media. There's this young mom outside of Seattle who was posting every day of February a picture of her 4-year-old daughter dressed as a famous African American. And it was amazing every single day. Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer. And so I thought, oh gosh, people need to know who these women are. So I literally flew out to Seattle, got a car and drove to Kent and met Christy Jones essays to go with your pictures. And she said, yes. And I said, well, we can do a whole series of these. And she said, oh no, I can only do one. I said, well, then we can't leave out the boys. So we have to, would you, do the same thing for a young man? She said, well, I have to find someone. I said, no, you don't. Flew to Dallas, got my grandson Caleb, and flew back to, drove back to Kent. So we now have a book that features Black and female, male and female African Americans who are all iconic. But I write about them from their childhood. So people will understand and get the point that every important person, no matter what color, no matter how great their accomplishment, was once a child. And it's to encourage young kids who are, 9 to 15 to start thinking about what they want to do because all of these people were doing something like what they're doing right now at that time. So it's called That They Lived. I hope that we'll be able to have millions of conversations about that because I think if we teach our children properly, teach them all of American history, that will go a long way toward getting away from this sort of customization and this idea and this conditioning that African Americans are lesser than, aren't as capable, and haven't done as much when we have been brilliant.
Well, thank you. That They Live, February 2nd. You can pre-order on Amazon. I'm looking forward to that. So I want to, first of all, thank you, Rochelle Riley, for this amazing dialogue here today. I know that it's going to really touch a lot of hearts, and I'm really just excited and grateful that I was asked to be part of this. And I want to definitely thank New Detroit and WK Kellogg Foundation for just putting on this very necessary, candid, very crucial conversation, and their commitment to continue these conversations throughout the year. So thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, Rose. Thanks for mental health and what you do. And at the end of the month, go to RochelleRiley.com. I'll be kicking this off at Source Booksellers because that's where I always
right
start.
around the corner.
I love it. Representation. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone for tuning in for this special edition of New Detroit's Town Hall Series, Content and Conversations on Race. We want to encourage you all to continue the conversation. We know that we cannot achieve racial healing with just one dialogue and just one day. So continue to talk to your family, friends, colleagues, neighbors. If you want to check out more conversations that we've had that have been a part of this series, you can do it right here on Facebook. And to learn more about New Detroit and our organization, please visit newdetroit.org.